The valley didn't forgive mistakes. Sawyer Briggs learned that his first winter on the land, when the cold came down like a hammer and took two of his horses and nearly took him. He learned it again the following spring when the creek flooded and washed out half his fence line. And he learned it every single day after that, in the way the wind carved lines into his face and the sun baked the moisture out of everything that wasn't already dead. This place made you hard, or it made you gone. He'd chosen hard. The ranch sat in a shallow depression between two ridges of scrub-covered rock, far enough from town that neighbors were a concept more than a reality. The house was rough timber and stone, built by his own hands over the course of 2 brutal years. It wasn't pretty. The door hung slightly crooked. The windows were mismatched salvage from a burned-out trading post. But it stood, and it was his, and that mattered more than aesthetics ever could. Sawyer stood on the porch now, watching the eastern trail. The stagecoach was late. Not unusual, the route was unpredictable, dependent on weather and the condition of roads that barely deserved the name. But today the delay gnawed at him differently. Today he was supposed to meet his wife. The arrangement had been practical, simple. A series of letters exchanged over 6 months, carefully worded inquiries and responses that laid out expectations without room for romance. He needed help on the ranch, someone to share the work, the isolation, the relentless sameness of frontier survival. She needed, well, she'd said she needed a fresh start, somewhere quiet, somewhere far from whatever she was leaving behind. He hadn't pressed for details. People came west to disappear all the time. The letter that sealed the arrangement had been brief. I accept your terms. I will arrive on the afternoon coach, first week of September. Iris Quaid. No flourishes. No false sentiment. Just an agreement between two people who understood that life out here didn't leave room for fairy tales. Sawyer respected that. He'd spent the morning making the house marginally more presentable, sweeping out the dust that accumulated in every corner, airing out blankets that smelled like smoke and leather, checking that the second bedroom was cleared of the tools and saddle parts he'd been storing there. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and honest work was the only currency he trusted. The sun climbed higher, heat shimmered off the rocks, and then, finally, movement on the trail. The stagecoach came rattling into view, pulled by 4 exhausted horses and trailing a plume of dust that hung in the still air like a signal fire. Sawyer stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt. His stomach did something unfamiliar, a tight, uncertain flutter that he ignored because there was no room for uncertainty. Not now. The coach slowed, then stopped. The driver, a grizzled man named Hutchins, who'd been running this route for 15 years, nodded down at Sawyer. Got your delivery, Briggs. The door opened, and everything Sawyer had expected evaporated like morning frost. The woman who stepped down wasn't frontier material. She was elegance packaged in travel dust, wearing a dress that probably cost more than his entire house. Deep blue fabric with embroidered details that caught the light. A fitted jacket that suggested tailoring, not necessity. Her hair was pinned up in a style that required time and mirrors, dark curls framing a face that was striking in a way that made Sawyer's jaw tighten. But it wasn't her appearance that set off alarms. It was her eyes. They swept the landscape with precision, cataloging distances, exits, threats, the way a hunted animal assesses terrain. She looked at the ridgeline, the trail behind the coach, the house, and finally at Sawyer himself. And in that moment, he saw something that made his chest constrict. Fear. Controlled, buried deep, but unmistakable. This woman wasn't here for a fresh start. She was here because she had nowhere else to run. Mr. Briggs? Her voice was smooth, educated, completely wrong for this place. That's right. He kept his tone neutral. Iris Quaid? A fractional pause, so brief he almost missed it. Yes. Hutchins was already unloading her trunk, a heavy piece of luggage that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby, not a ranch house. He dropped it with a thud, tipped his hat, and climbed back onto the driver's bench. Safe travels, ma'am. Briggs. The coach lurched forward, wheels creaking, and then it was gone, leaving the two of them standing in a silence that felt thick enough to choke on. Sawyer looked at the woman who was supposedly his bride. She looked back. Neither spoke. Finally, Sawyer bent and grabbed one handle of the trunk. House is this way. She took the other handle without comment, and together they hauled the luggage across the yard. It was heavier than it should be, packed with things that clearly weren't practical clothing or basic supplies. He didn't ask, didn't comment, just helped her get it through the door and into the main room. The interior of the house was sparse: table, chairs, a wood stove, shelves holding preserved food, and basic supplies. Everything functional, nothing decorative. Iris stood in the center of the room, still wearing that careful mask, and Sawyer saw her taking inventory the same way she'd surveyed the landscape, looking for threats, planning escapes. "Second room's through there," he gestured to the narrow doorway on the left. "It's yours. I'll be in the other one." Her eyebrows rose slightly. I know what we discussed." Sawyer's voice came out harder than he intended. "But right now you look like you're about 2 seconds from running, and I'm not interested in making that worse. You want separate rooms until you're comfortable, we'll do separate rooms." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite relief, but close. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just settle in. We'll talk when you're ready." She nodded and moved toward the room, dragging the trunk with visible effort. Sawyer watched her go, then stepped outside because the air in the house suddenly felt too close, too complicated. He'd prepared for practical, for simple. He hadn't prepared for this, whatever this was. The first 2 days passed in careful silence. Iris, if that was even her real name, moved through the house like a ghost, taking up minimal space and making almost no sound. She kept to her room mostly, emerging only for meals that she prepared with surprising competence. The food was good, better than good. Dishes that required technique and ingredients she must have brought with her because Sawyer sure as hell didn't stock saffron or fresh herbs. They ate across from each other at the small table, the scrape of forks against tin plates the only conversation. Sawyer watched her when she wasn't looking, studied the way her hands moved, delicate, precise, completely unmarked by labor. The way she sat with perfect posture even when exhausted. The way her eyes would drift to the window every few minutes, scanning the horizon. Always watching, always waiting. On the third morning, she appeared in the kitchen before dawn wearing a simpler dress. Still too fine for ranch work, but closer to practical. Her hair was in a single braid instead of the elaborate style from the stagecoach. "I'd like to help," she said. Sawyer looked up from his coffee. "Help with what?" "Whatever needs doing. I'm not here to be a burden." He studied her for a long moment. "You ever worked with livestock?" "No." "Mended fence?" "No." "Hauled water, split wood, mucked out a stable?" "No." Her chin lifted slightly. "But I can learn." Sawyer almost smiled. "Almost." "All right. Finish your breakfast. Then we'll see what you're made of." What she was made of, it turned out, was stubborn determination wrapped in total inexperience. Sawyer set her to work on simple tasks, hauling water from the well to the trough, organizing the tool shed, sweeping out the barn. She attacked each job with focused intensity, never complaining even when it was obvious she was struggling. But the work exposed her completely. Her hands blistered within an hour. She didn't know how to lift heavy loads without straining her back. She flinched away from the horses when they moved too quickly. Every single movement screamed wealth, privilege, a life spent far away from anything resembling manual labor. By midday, she was sweating through her dress, dirt smudged across her cheek, breathing hard as she tried to shift a bag of feed that Sawyer could move with one hand. He watched from the barn entrance, arms crossed. "You want to tell me who you really are?" She froze. Didn't look at him. "I told you." Iris quaid. "No, you told me a name. That's not the same as telling me who you are." "Does it matter?" Her voice was tight. "I'm here. I'm working. You're lying. Not an accusation, just a statement. And I need to know if that lie is going to bring trouble to my door." She straightened slowly, turning to face him. Her eyes were hard now, defensive. "Would you have accepted my letters if I'd told you the truth?" "Depends on the truth." "Then I guess we'll never know." She grabbed the feed bag again, muscles trembling with effort. Sawyer stepped forward and took the bag from her hands, lifting it easily onto the shelf. When he turned back, she was watching him with that same careful assessment. "I don't care about your past," he said. "Not really. People come west to leave things behind. That's half the point. But if you brought danger with you, I need to know. Because out here, there's no sheriff 5 minutes away. No law except what we make. If something's coming, I need to be ready. Iris was silent for a long moment. Then, nothing's coming. It was the first outright lie she'd told him since arriving. He could see it in the way her hands clenched, the way her breathing changed, the way her eyes went flat and distant. All right, he said quietly. But when it does come, and it will, you tell me before it gets here. Deal? She nodded. Neither of them believed her. That night, Sawyer couldn't sleep. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Through the thin wall, he could hear Iris moving in her room, pacing, maybe, or rearranging things. Restless energy that suggested she wasn't sleeping either. He'd built this life deliberately. Alone. Uncomplicated. Every day structured around work that made sense, problems that could be solved with sweat and time and stubbornness. He'd convinced himself he needed a partner for practical reasons, but now he wondered if he'd just been lonely enough to make a stupid decision. Because this woman, whoever she really was, represented exactly the kind of complication he'd been trying to avoid. Around midnight, the pacing in her room stopped. Sawyer rolled onto his side and closed his eyes, forcing himself toward sleep. And that's when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast, coming from the east. He was up and moving before conscious thought kicked in, pulling on his pants and grabbing the rifle from beside the door. Through the window, he could see shapes in the darkness. 3 riders, maybe 4, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. They weren't passing through. They were coming here. Sawyer moved quickly to Iris's door and knocked once. Get up, get dressed, don't light a lamp. The door opened immediately. She was already awake, already dressed, eyes wide but focused. How many? She asked. 3, maybe 4. He handed her the rifle. You know how to use this? Yes. Of course she did. Stay inside, away from the windows. If shooting starts, get down and stay down. He grabbed his gun belt from the hook by the front door, strapped it on. What are you going to do? Find out what they want. Sawyer. Her voice stopped him. When he looked back, her face had gone pale. They're here for me. You sure about that? Yes. He studied her for a moment. Then I guess we're about to find out what kind of trouble you brought. He stepped out onto the porch before she could respond. The riders had stopped about 30 yards from the house, positioned in a loose semicircle. Sawyer's eyes adjusted to the darkness, picking out details. Well-dressed men. Quality horses. Not drifters or common thieves. The one in the center urged his horse forward a few steps. Sawyer Briggs? The voice was educated, controlled. East Coast accent. That's right, kind of late for social calls. My apologies for the hour. We're looking for someone, a woman. The rider's tone remained pleasant, conversational. We have reason to believe she may have passed through this area. Lots of people pass through. It's a stagecoach route. This particular woman would stand out. Early 20s, dark hair, refined appearance, likely traveling under an assumed name. A pause. She's quite valuable to us. Sawyer kept his hand near his gun, his posture relaxed but ready. Valuable how? That's a private matter. So's who I do or don't have in my house. The rider's horse shifted, hooves scraping dirt. Mr. Briggs, I'm trying to handle this civilly. The woman we're looking for is named Victoria Peaton. She's the daughter of Marcus Peaton, and she's been promised in marriage to a very prominent family. She ran away 3 months ago with items that don't belong to her. Sounds like a family problem. It's a legal problem. She's a fugitive and a thief. The pleasant tone was hardening now. And if you're harboring her, that makes you complicit. Sawyer let the silence stretch. Behind him, he could feel Iris, Victoria, standing just inside the doorway, probably holding the rifle, probably trying not to breathe too loud. I got a wife, Sawyer said finally. Came on the stagecoach 3 days ago. Name's Iris Quaid. We corresponded for 6 months before she arrived. All proper and legal. I'd like to see her. She's sleeping. Wake her. No. Sawyer's hand moved to his gun, not drawing, just resting on the grip. You want to come onto my property in the middle of the night, making accusations? You can do it in daylight with a warrant. Until then, you can turn those horses around and get gone. The rider leaned forward in his saddle. Even in the darkness, Sawyer could see the cold calculation in his eyes. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the rider pulled his horse back, rejoining the other two. "We'll return in the morning, Mr. Briggs, with proper authority. I strongly suggest you reconsider your position." "I'll be here." The three riders turned and moved off into the darkness, hoofbeats fading gradually until the night went quiet again. Sawyer stayed on the porch for several minutes, making sure they were really gone. Then he went back inside, securing the door behind him. Victoria was standing in the main room, rifle still in her hands, face drained of color. "They'll be back," she said. "I know." "You should let me go, before this gets worse." "Where would you go?" She didn't answer. Sawyer took the rifle from her hands and set it down. "Sit. You're going to tell me everything, and I mean everything, because in about 6 hours those men are going to come back, probably with more friends, and I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." She sat, folded her hands in her lap, and for the first time since arriving, the careful mask cracked. "My real name is Victoria Piton," she said quietly. "My father is Marcus Piton. He owns half the railroads east of the Mississippi and most of the politicians in between. When I was 17, he arranged my marriage to Charles Harwick, heir to a shipping fortune. I was told it was my duty, my obligation, my purpose." "You didn't agree." "I didn't get a choice." Her voice hardened. "I was a bargaining chip, a merger disguised as matrimony. Charles was 15 years older, cruel in small ways that people excuse in powerful men, and everyone pretended I should be grateful." Sawyer listened without interrupting. "I played along for 3 years, smiled at parties, learned to be what they wanted, and then 6 months ago Charles showed me what our life would really be like." She looked up, eyes fierce. "He had other women, multiple, and he made it clear that after we were married, my job was to produce an heir and then make myself scarce. Any objection would be handled firmly." "So you ran." "I waited, planned. My father kept a fortune in jewelry in his safe, including a necklace worth more than most men make in a lifetime. I took it, pawned pieces slowly, carefully, using the money to build a new identity. Iris Quaid, a widow from Philadelphia looking for a fresh start. The necklace they mentioned. I still have it, what's left of it." She stood, moved to her room, and returned with a small velvet pouch. When she opened it, Sawyer saw emeralds and diamonds catching lamplight, a cascade of green fire worth enough to buy 100 ranches. "That's what they want," she said. "Not me. This, proof of the theft, leverage to force me back into line." Sawyer stared at the necklace. "And if you give it back?" "It doesn't matter. I humiliated my father, embarrassed Charles, proved I was defective property." Her laugh was bitter. "They'll lock me away somewhere respectable where I can't cause more damage. Or they'll have the marriage annulled, and I'll spend the rest of my life being reminded that I'm worthless. Either way, I lose." Sawyer was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. "Why me?" he finally asked. "Why come all the way out here?" "Because you were real." Victoria's voice softened. "Your letters didn't make promises, didn't paint pretty pictures. You just told the truth about what life would be like. Hard, isolated, honest. And I thought—" She trailed off. "Thought what?" "That maybe out here, I could be real too." Sawyer looked at this woman, this stranger who'd lied her way into his life, brought danger to his door, and still somehow managed to seem more genuine than anyone he'd met in years. He should send her away, should wash his hands of this whole mess before it consumed everything he'd built. Instead, he heard himself say, "All right." Victoria blinked. "All right, what?" "All right, we deal with this, together." He stood, moved to the window, looked out at the empty darkness. "Those men will come back at dawn, probably with reinforcements, and they'll try to take you by force or by law, whichever works faster." "I know, so we don't let them." He turned back to face her. "You're my wife, far as anyone knows. We got papers, got witnesses who saw you arrive. That gives us legal standing. Not much, but some. They have more resources, more connections. Maybe. But this is my land, my territory, and I know things about survival they've never had to learn." His jaw set. "Question is, are you willing to fight for this? Really fight? Because if we're doing this, there's no backing down halfway. Victoria stood. Her hands had stopped shaking. When she looked at him, Sawyer saw something he recognized. The same hard determination he'd needed to survive every winter, every drought, every impossible day. "I'm not going back," she said. "Whatever it takes." "Then we need a plan." They spent the rest of the night preparing. Sawyer showed her the terrain around the ranch, the ridge lines, the creek bed, the places where horses would struggle and where cover was thickest. He checked his weapons, made sure the ammunition was accessible, positioned supplies where they could be reached quickly. Victoria proved she'd been telling the truth about knowing how to shoot. She handled the rifle with competent familiarity, checked the sight, worked the action smoothly. Whatever education she'd received had apparently included practical skills alongside the etiquette and embroidery. As dawn approached, they were as ready as they could be. Sawyer stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, watching the trail. Victoria stood beside him, closer than necessary, their shoulders almost touching. "You could still walk away," she said quietly. "Tell them I lied to you. You'd be clear." "Could." He took a sip of coffee. "Won't." "Why?" It was a fair question. Sawyer thought about it, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gold of sunrise. "Had a neighbor once," he said. "Few years back. Family man, good person. Got on the wrong side of some land speculators who wanted his property. They came with lawyers and guns and threats. He asked me to stand with him." Sawyer's voice went flat. "I didn't. Told myself it wasn't my fight. Told myself getting involved would just make things worse." "What happened?" "They killed him. Made it look like an accident. Took the land. And nobody did a damn thing because nobody wanted the trouble." He looked at Victoria. "I swore after that. Next time someone needed help and I could give it, I wouldn't walk away. Not for convenience, not for safety, not for any reason except cowardice. This isn't the same." "Close enough." He drained the coffee. "Besides, you threw everything away to be free. That's worth respecting." Before Victoria could respond, movement appeared on the eastern trail. Not 3 riders this time. 7. They came in formation, the same 3 from last night, plus 4 more. One of them wore a badge that caught the morning light. "Marshal," Sawyer said quietly. "They brought the law. They brought someone with a badge. Not the same thing." He set down his cup. "Stay behind me. Let me handle this." The riders approached slowly, deliberately. They stopped 20 feet from the porch, horses stamping and blowing. The man with the badge, gray-haired, weathered, carrying himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed, nudged his horse forward. "Sawyer Briggs?" "Marshal." "I'm Marshal Thomas Wade. I have a warrant for the arrest of Victoria Piton, wanted for theft of property valued at over $50,000. He produced a folded paper. "I'm told she may be on your property." Sawyer didn't move. "I have a wife named Iris Quaid. She arrived legally 3 days ago. You got a warrant for her?" "Mr. Briggs, don't make this difficult." "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm stating facts." He gestured to Victoria. "This is my wife. We have letters of correspondence going back 6 months. We have a legal marriage arrangement witnessed by the stagecoach company. Unless you're telling me that marriage is somehow illegal, I don't see how your warrant applies." The marshal's jaw tightened. "The woman you're calling your wife is Victoria Piton. She fled her family and stole valuable property. That's a crime regardless of what name she's using. You have proof she's Victoria Piton?" "I have the word of her father and her betrothed." "So, no proof. Just accusations from people who have a financial interest in getting her back." Sawyer crossed his arms. "Out here, Marshal, we need more than words." One of the other riders, the one from last night, spoke up. "This is absurd. That woman is clearly..." "Clearly what?" Sawyer's voice cut through. "Clearly well-dressed? Clearly educated? Those are crimes now?" "Mr. Brigg." The marshal's patience was visibly fraying. "I can make this easy or hard. Your choice." "Then make it legal," Sawyer shot back. "Because right now you're on my property making threats based on accusations you can't prove. That's not law. That's harassment." For a long moment, the air hung heavy with tension. Then Victoria stepped forward. "I'll speak for myself," she said. Sawyer started to object, but she touched his arm gently, silencing him. She looked up at the marshal. My name is Iris Quaid. I came west to start a new life with my husband. If there's a woman named Victoria P. Ton, I'm sorry for her troubles, but I'm not her. We can prove otherwise, the writer from last night said coldly. Birthmarks, distinguishing features. We know everything about her. Then get your proof, Victoria said calmly. Bring documentation. Bring witnesses who can swear under oath they know me personally. Bring something more than assumptions and warrants based on hearsay. Her voice hardened. Or leave us alone. The marshal looked between them, clearly calculating. Finally, he folded the warrant and put it away. I'll be back, he said, with everything I need. We'll be here. The riders turned and left, dust trailing behind them. Sawyer and Victoria stood together on the porch, watching until they disappeared. They'll come back stronger, Victoria said. I know. And I'm not sure we can hold them off forever. Probably not. Sawyer looked at her. But we made them work for it. That's something. She almost smiled. Is it always like this out here, fighting for everything? Pretty much. Good. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving Sawyer on the porch, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into, and knowing, despite everything, that he'd do it again. The dust hadn't settled before Sawyer was moving. He walked the perimeter of the ranch twice, checking sight lines, weak points, places where men could approach without being seen. Victoria followed at a distance, watching him work, saying nothing. The silence between them had shifted from careful to something closer to understanding, though neither would have called it trust yet. Trust took time they might not have. They'll wait a few days, Sawyer said when he finished his second circuit. Let the threat sit. Make us nervous. Will it work? He looked at her. You nervous? Terrified. She said it plainly, without embarrassment. But I've been terrified for 3 months. I'm getting used to it. Sawyer almost respected that. Almost. Come on. If we're doing this, you need to actually know how to work this place. Can't have you just pretending. Over the next week, he taught her everything he could compress into dawn to dusk days. How to read the weather by the color of the sky at sunrise. How to check the horses for injuries or illness. How to mend fence wire without slicing your hands open, though she managed that anyway the first 3 tries. How to shoot at distance, compensating for wind. How to move through scrub without making noise. She learned like someone who knew failure might be fatal. Her hands developed calluses. Her face got sunburned despite the hat he gave her. She stopped flinching when the horses moved quickly and started anticipating their behavior instead. And slowly, grudgingly, she became less of a liability and more of something approaching useful. They didn't talk much beyond what the work required. Sawyer had never been good at conversation that wasn't about immediate problems, and Victoria seemed content to let silence do most of the talking. But sometimes in the evenings, after the day's work was done, and they sat on the porch watching darkness claim the valley, words would slip out. I had a brother, she said one night unprompted. Henry, 2 years younger. He hated everything about our father's world as much as I did. Sawyer waited. When she didn't continue, he asked, Where is he now? Dead. Riding accident when he was 19. Her voice went flat. Except it wasn't an accident. He was going to testify against one of Father's business partners in a fraud case. The horse was spooked deliberately. You're sure? I'm sure. Father had the investigation closed within 48 hours, called it a tragedy, and moved on. She pulled her knees up to her chest. That's when I knew there was no getting out through legitimate means. The system was built to protect people like my father. If I wanted freedom, I'd have to steal it. Sawyer thought about that. Your father know you figured it out? I don't think so. I played my part perfectly after that. The grieving sister, the obedient daughter. I waited 3 more years before I made my move. She looked at him. Does that make me a coward? Waiting that long? Makes you smart. Cowards don't plan. They just run. And what do you call what I did? Survival. He stood, stretched. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we're riding out to check the north fence line. It's a long day. She went inside without argument, and Sawyer stayed on the porch until the stars came out thick and bright. He'd lived alone long enough that another person's presence should have felt intrusive, but Victoria moved through his space without demanding it become hers. She cleaned up after herself, pulled her weight, Didn't expect conversation or comfort or anything except the basic courtesy of being treated like a person. It was strange how quickly that became normal. On the 8th day after the marshal's visit, they were in the barn when Sawyer noticed Victoria had stopped working. She stood near the window, staring out at the eastern trail with that same hunted animal focus. "What is it?" "Riders, 2 of them." Sawyer moved to look. Sure enough, 2 figures on horseback were approaching, but these weren't the same men from before. One was older, round-shouldered. The other younger, gangly. They rode like people who spent more time in offices than on horses. "Lawyers, probably," Sawyer said, coming to make threats sound official. "Should I hide?" "No point. They know you're here." He grabbed his gun belt from the hook. "But stay close. Don't say anything unless I tell you to." They walked out to meet the riders as they approached. Up close, Sawyer's guess proved accurate. The older man wore a suit that had seen better days, dusty from travel. The younger one carried a leather satchel and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Briggs," the older man said, "I'm Gerald Ashford, attorney representing the Patton family interests. This is my associate, Mr. Dalton." "Lawyers in the middle of nowhere must be serious." Ashford smiled thinly. "May we dismount? This conversation will take some time." Sawyer gestured toward the hitching post. "Make it quick." They tied their horses, and Ashford pulled papers from his satchel. "I'm here to present you with a formal demand for the return of Victoria Patton to her legal guardians, along with restitution for property stolen from the Patton estate." "Still calling her Victoria? I keep telling you people her name is Iris." "Mr. Briggs, please. We're all adults here." Ashford's tone turned condescending. "You know who this woman is. We know you know. This performance is unnecessary." "Performance?" Sawyer let the word hang. "That's interesting coming from a lawyer." Ashford's expression hardened. "My client is prepared to be generous. If you turn over Miss Patton immediately, there will be no charges filed against you for harboring a fugitive. Additionally, the Patton family is willing to offer you $5,000 for your inconvenience." Victoria stiffened beside him, but Sawyer's expression didn't change. $5,000. A substantial sum for a rancher. "For selling out my wife. For ending your involvement in a criminal matter before it destroys you." Ashford leaned forward. "Mr. Briggs, you seem like a reasonable man. You've built something here. Why throw it away for a woman you barely know?" "Maybe I like long odds." "This isn't a joke?" The condescension vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "Marcus Patton is one of the most powerful men in the country. He has resources you can't imagine, legal teams, political connections, the ability to make problems disappear or make them permanent." "That a threat?" "It's reality. You're a single rancher with no influence and no protection. If you continue this path, you'll be crushed. Legally, financially, possibly physically." Ashford gestured to the papers. "This offer expires the moment I leave. Take it. Walk away with money and your life intact." Sawyer looked at Victoria. Her face was carefully blank, but her hands were clenched tight enough that her knuckles had gone white. This was the moment, he realized, the place where most people would calculate the cost and step aside, where rational self-interest would overcome whatever principles they claimed to hold. He thought about his neighbor, the good man who died because Sawyer hadn't stood with him. He thought about Victoria's brother, dead because he tried to do the right thing. He thought about all the times power had crushed people who couldn't fight back, and how the world stayed broken because everyone kept choosing safety over justice. Then he looked back at Ashford. "Get off my land." Ashford blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Take your papers and your threats and your blood money and get the hell off my property." "Mr. Briggs, you're making a catastrophic mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake." Sawyer's hand moved to his gun, not drawing, just resting there. "You've got about 10 seconds before I decide you're trespassing and handle it accordingly." The younger lawyer Dalton took a step back. Ashford's face went red, but he was smart enough to recognize when negotiation had failed. "You'll regret this," he said. "I regret lots of things. This won't be one of them." Ashford snatched up his papers and mounted his horse with poor grace. Dalton followed suit, nearly dropping his satchel in the process. They turned and rode off, Ashford's back radiating fury. Sawyer and Victoria watched them disappear into the distance. $5,000, Victoria said quietly. That's more than this ranch is worth. Probably. You didn't even hesitate. Would you have wanted me to? She was quiet for a long moment. No, but I wouldn't have blamed you if you did. Well, Sawyer turned back toward the barn. We've got work to finish. They walked in silence, but something had shifted again. The careful distance between them had closed by another degree. That night, Victoria cooked something elaborate with the last of the ingredients she'd brought. Some kind of roasted chicken with herbs and vegetables that tasted better than anything Sawyer had eaten in years. They ate slowly, and for the first time the silence felt comfortable instead of cautious. My mother died when I was 8, Victoria said suddenly. Pneumonia. Father remarried within 6 months to a woman half his age who cared more about social standing than her stepchildren. She pushed food around her plate. After Henry died, she didn't even pretend to mourn. Just started planning parties again. Sounds lonely. It was. Is. She looked up. That's why your letters meant something. They were honest. You didn't try to impress me or sell me a fantasy. You just told me what life would actually be like. Didn't think there was much point in lying. You'd figure it out soon enough anyway. Most people don't think that way. They'll say anything to get what they want. Her eyes met his. Why are you different? Sawyer considered the question. Had a father who lied constantly, charming bastard, who could talk his way into or out of anything, made promises he never kept, borrowed money he never repaid, built a life on other people's trust, and then burned it all down. He set down his fork, watched him destroy everything he touched because he couldn't be honest for 5 minutes. Swore I'd never be like that. What happened to him? Shot in a card game when I was 15, cheated the wrong person. Sawyer's voice was flat. Didn't even come as a surprise, just felt inevitable. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choices. He stood, started clearing dishes. We all do. Victoria helped him clean up, their movements developing an unconscious coordination. When the kitchen was sorted, they stepped outside for the evening ritual of watching darkness arrive. The stars were particularly bright tonight, scattered across the sky like somebody had thrown diamonds against black velvet. Sawyer had spent enough nights alone under these stars that their patterns felt more familiar than most people's faces. It's beautiful out here, Victoria said. Harsh, but beautiful. That's the frontier. Kills you or makes you stronger, sometimes both. Do you ever get lonely? The question caught him off guard. Sometimes, but loneliness is just quiet. You get used to it. I don't think I could. Get used to it, I mean. She wrapped her arms around herself. I spent 3 years surrounded by people and felt completely alone. It was worse than actual solitude. Because they saw what they wanted to see instead of who you were. Yes. She looked at him. You don't do that. Don't know you well enough to have expectations yet. She almost smiled. Is that your way of saying you're keeping an open mind? It's my way of saying I'm waiting to see who you turn out to be. Before Victoria could respond, a sound cut through the night, distant but distinct, breaking glass. Sawyer was moving instantly, grabbing his rifle from inside the door. Victoria followed, her own gun already in hand. They moved to the edge of the porch, scanning the darkness. Could be an animal, Victoria whispered. Could be. But Sawyer didn't believe it. Animals didn't break glass with that kind of precision. Another sound, closer. The scrape of metal on wood. Someone's at the barn, Sawyer said quietly. Stay here, cover the house. I'm coming with you. Victoria. I can shoot. You might need backup. Don't argue. There wasn't time to argue anyway. Sawyer moved off the porch in a low crouch, Victoria matching his pace. They crossed the open ground between the house and barn, every step feeling exposed despite the darkness. The barn door was ajar. Sawyer had closed it himself 2 hours ago. He gestured for Victoria to cover the entrance while he moved to the side, approaching from an angle that would let him see inside without silhouetting himself against the doorway. The smell hit him first, kerosene, sharp and chemical and wrong. Someone was trying to burn down his barn. Sawyer burst through the side entrance, rifle raised. A figure spun toward him, face obscured by shadows, hand reaching for a gun. Sawyer fired a warning shot into the roof beam. The crack of the rifle in the enclosed space was deafening. Don't move! The figure froze. Young man, maybe 25, dressed too well for barn work. His hand hovered near his weapon, but didn't quite commit to drawing. Easy, the man said. Easy. I'm just here to deliver a message. By burning down my barn? Orders? Nothing personal. The man's voice shook slightly. You were supposed to be focused on the house. I was supposed to slip in, set the fire, slip out. Nobody gets hurt. Except my livestock and my livelihood. It's just property, can be rebuilt. Sawyer's finger tightened on the trigger. Get on your knees, hands behind your head. The man complied slowly. Victoria appeared in the doorway, gun trained on him as well. There's more coming, the man said. This was just a distraction. They're hitting the house right now. Sawyer's blood went cold. He looked at Victoria. Her face had gone pale. You're lying, she said. I'm really not. 3 men armed supposed to grab you while your husband was busy with me. The man's smile was ugly. Guess they underestimated how fast he'd move. Sawyer made a split-second decision. He looked at Victoria. Watch him. He moves. Shoot him. Where are you going? To stop them. He ran back toward the house, every nerve screaming. If this kid was telling the truth, and the kerosene smell suggested he was, then Victoria's pursuers had just escalated from legal threats to direct action. No more marshals or lawyers. Now they were using force. The house looked quiet from the outside. Too quiet. Sawyer approached from the side, using the terrain for cover, rifle ready. He could see the front door standing slightly open. He'd closed and latched it. Someone had been inside. He moved to the window, peering in carefully. The main room was empty, but furniture had been disturbed. Someone had searched the place, quick and messy. Then he heard it. Movement from Victoria's room. Multiple footsteps. Sawyer came through the front door fast and low. 2 men were in Victoria's room, tearing through her belongings. A third stood near the doorway, gun drawn, but attention focused inward. The guard turned at the sound of Sawyer's entrance. His gun came up. Sawyer fired first, aiming for center mass. The man went down hard, blood blooming across his shirt. The other 2 erupted from the bedroom. Sawyer dove behind the table, flipping it on its side for cover. Shots exploded through the small space, wood splintering, glass shattering. Sawyer returned fire, controlled bursts, trying to pin them down without wasting ammunition. "Give us the woman and we leave," one of them shouted. "That's all we want." "Not happening." More shots. One punched through the table inches from Sawyer's head. He rolled, fired twice, heard a grunt of pain. One down, maybe wounded, maybe dead. The last man made a break for the door. Sawyer caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down but kept his gun, swinging it toward Sawyer with desperate determination. A rifle crack from outside. The man jerked and fell still. Victoria stood in the doorway, smoking rifle in her hands, face white but steady. "You okay?" Sawyer asked. "I think so." Her voice shook. "The one in the barn?" "Unconscious, hit him with the rifle butt when he tried to run." Sawyer moved through the house quickly, checking the bodies. The guard by the door was dead. One in the bedroom was bleeding from the leg, alive but not getting up anytime soon. The one Victoria shot wasn't moving. "We need to tie up the live one," Sawyer said, "and figure out what the hell to do next." They worked quickly, binding the wounded man's hands and leg wound, then dragging him into the main room. Victoria retrieved the would-be arsonist from the barn, still groggy but conscious. They tied him up next to his companion. Dawn was maybe 2 hours away. The ranch looked like a war zone, bullet holes in the walls, blood on the floor, bodies that would need burying. Sawyer stood in the middle of the destruction, trying to think past the adrenaline crash. "They'll use this against us," Victoria said quietly. 3 dead men. Self-defense or not, they'll twist it. "I know. We could run, take the horses, head west, disappear." Sawyer looked at her. "Is that what you want?" "I want to stop putting you in danger. This is my fight, not yours." "Pretty sure they made it my fight when they tried to burn down my barn and shoot me in my own house." He moved to the window, watched the sky lighten incrementally. "Besides, running now just means they win. They get the land, they get the story, they get everything. And if we stay, then we fight, really fight, no more defensive positions." He turned to face her. "We've got 2 prisoners. That's leverage. And dead men on my property who are clearly the aggressors. That's evidence. Evidence they'll bury. Maybe. But maybe not if we move fast enough. Victoria studied him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we stop reacting and start acting. We take these prisoners to town, file charges, make this public before they can control the narrative. He grabbed his gun belt. It's risky. They might have people in town ready to move against us, but sitting here waiting for the next attack is suicide. How far is town? 6 hours if we push the horses. We leave now. We can be there by noon. Victoria looked at the bodies, the destruction, the blood. And if we don't make it, then at least we went down fighting instead of waiting to die. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, let's do it. They spent the next hour preparing, loaded the prisoners into the wagon, tied them securely, gathered weapons and ammunition. Sawyer wrote a quick note explaining the situation and left it on the table in case they didn't make it back and someone needed to know what happened. As the sun broke over the eastern ridge, they climbed onto the wagon bench. Victoria sat beside him, rifle across her lap, face set with grim determination. Ready? Sawyer asked. No, but let's go anyway. He snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward, pulling them out of the ranch and onto the trail toward town. Behind them, the house stood damaged but still standing, a testament to survival that Sawyer hoped wasn't about to become a monument to failure. The ride was tense and silent. Every shadow could hide an ambush. Every distant sound could be more riders coming to finish what the first group had started. But the hours passed without incident, the landscape rolling by in familiar patterns, scrub and rock, and endless sky. Around mid-morning, Victoria spoke. Thank you. For what? For not selling me out, for fighting, for... She trailed off, searching for words. For seeing me as a person instead of a problem. You are a problem, Sawyer said. Just happen to be a person too. She almost laughed. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in months. Your standards are too low. Maybe. Or maybe I just appreciate honesty. They fell back into silence, but it was different now, comfortable. The kind of quiet that comes from understanding rather than uncertainty. Town appeared on the horizon just after noon, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a dusty main street. Sawyer had never loved the place, but right now it represented something crucial. Witnesses, public record, the possibility of justice that couldn't be buried as easily as out on an isolated ranch. They pulled up in front of the marshal's office. A different marshal than Wade. This one was local, a man named Garrett, who Sawyer had dealt with a few times over land disputes and lost livestock. Garrett stepped out onto the boardwalk, eyes widening as he took in the wagon, the tied prisoners, the bullet holes in Sawyer's shirt. What the hell happened to you, Briggs? Got attacked on my property last night. 3 men dead, 2 prisoners. Need to file a formal complaint before their employers try to spin this. Garrett's expression shifted from surprise to careful neutrality. This related to that Paton business? Everything's related to that business. Sawyer, Garrett's voice dropped. I got a telegram yesterday. Federal marshals coming through in 2 days with a proper warrant. You might want to what? Run? Hide? Sawyer climbed down from the wagon. I'm done running and I never started hiding. These men attacked my property. That's a crime regardless of who's paying them. Garrett looked at Victoria, then back at Sawyer. You're making powerful enemies. They made an enemy out of me first. For a moment, Garrett just stood there, weighing options. Then he sighed. All right, bring them inside. Let's get statements on record. They spent the next several hours documenting everything. Sawyer gave his account. Victoria gave hers, careful to stick to the identity of Iris Quaid, but truthful about the events. The prisoners were processed, their wounds tended by the town doctor who looked deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. Word spread fast in a small town. By late afternoon, a crowd had gathered outside the marshal's office. Some were curious. Some were clearly aligned with the Paton interests. Well-dressed men who watched with cold calculation. Sawyer could feel the pressure building like a storm front. We should stay in town tonight, Garrett said quietly. Hotel's got rooms. Safer than riding back in the dark. Sawyer nodded. They secured a room, one room, because separate accommodations would undermine their story, and collapsed into chairs, exhaustion finally catching up with them. Victoria sat by the window watching the street. They're going to come after us harder now. I know. We killed 3 of their men, humiliated them publicly. There's no walking this back. Wasn't planning to walk it back. She turned to look at him. Why are you doing this? Really? Sawyer thought about lying. Thought about giving her the easy answer about principles or justice, or standing up to bullies. But they'd gone too far for easy answers. Because you remind me of someone, he said finally. Who? Me. 5 years ago. Running from something. Trying to build something new. Hoping the past wouldn't catch up. He leaned back, closed his eyes. Difference is, nobody stood with me when my past came calling. I had to face it alone. And I swore if I ever had the chance to stand with someone else, I would. What were you running from? Debt? Bad decisions? A woman I thought I loved who turned out to be using me to hide money she'd stolen. He opened his eyes, looked at her. Sound familiar? Victoria's expression flickered. I'm not using you. I know. That's why I'm still here. They sat in silence as darkness filled the room. Outside, the town settled into evening routines. Somewhere a piano played badly. Voices drifted up from the saloon. Normal life continuing around them while they sat in the eye of a storm that was far from over. What happens tomorrow? Victoria asked. Tomorrow we see if the law means anything out here, or if money just buys whatever truth it wants. And if money wins? Sawyer checked his gun, reloaded the spent rounds. Then we go back to the ranch and prepare for war. Victoria nodded slowly. She moved away from the window, sat on the edge of the bed. I never wanted this. Any of it. I know. I just wanted to be free. I know that too. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Sawyer saw something he hadn't expected. Not gratitude, not dependence, but recognition. Like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, understanding that he wasn't helping her out of obligation or attraction or any simple motivation. He was helping her because he knew what it cost to fight alone, and because some fights were worth having even when you knew you might lose. Get some sleep, Sawyer said. Long day tomorrow. Victoria nodded and lay down fully clothed, gun within reach. Sawyer took the chair by the door, positioning himself where he could watch both the window and the hallway. Sleep didn't come easy, but eventually exhaustion won out. He drifted in and out of consciousness, jerking awake at every sound, hand reaching for his weapon reflexively. Sometime in the deepest part of night, he heard Victoria whisper, Sawyer? Yeah? Thank you for everything. Stop thanking me. Makes me nervous. A pause, then quieter. I think I'm starting to understand why you live alone out here. Why's that? Because people are exhausting. Despite everything, Sawyer smiled in the darkness. Now you're getting it. Morning came too fast and brought complications with it. Sawyer woke to shouting in the street below. He was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, moving to the window. Victoria sat up on the bed, already reaching for her rifle. What is it? Crowd, bigger than last night. He peered through the dusty glass. 20, maybe 30 people gathered in front of the marshal's office. Some looked like townspeople. Others were clearly outsiders, too well-dressed, too organized. They knew we were here. Of course they did. Small town, expensive telegrams, people who can be bought. Victoria moved beside him, looking down. That man in the gray suit, third from the left. I know him. From where? He worked for my father, security, the kind who makes problems disappear quietly. Her voice tightened. If he's here, it means they're done being subtle. Sawyer checked his ammunition. Still had plenty, but not enough if this turned into a real fight. We need to get to Garrett, figure out what's happening. They moved carefully down the stairs, weapons ready, but not raised. The hotel keeper, a nervous man named Phillips, intercepted them at the bottom. Marshall wants to see you, says it's urgent. I bet he does. They crossed the street through the crowd, feeling eyes track their movement. The well-dressed men didn't hide their attention. One of them, the security man Victoria had identified, smiled coldly as they passed. Sawyer kept his hand near his gun and didn't smile back. Inside the marshal's office, Garrett looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Papers covered his desk. His coffee sat cold and untouched. When he saw them, something like relief crossed his face, quickly replaced by worry. We've got a situation. Notice the crowd, Sawyer said. It's worse than that. Garrett pulled out a telegram, handed it over. Came in an hour ago. Federal Marshal Wade is arriving today. Not tomorrow. Today. With a full warrant for Victoria Piton's arrest and authorization to use whatever force necessary. Victoria's face went pale. How is that legal? We filed charges against the men who attacked us. Your charges are under review pending investigation of their counterclaims. Garrett's voice was careful, like he was reading from a script he didn't believe. They're saying you and Sawyer murdered 3 men in cold blood and fabricated the attack story. They have witnesses prepared to testify that you instigated the violence. That's horseshit, Sawyer said flatly. I know, but they have money and lawyers and enough pressure that my hands are tied. Garrett looked at Victoria directly. Ma'am, I don't know who you really are, and frankly, I don't care. But if Wade gets here with that warrant, I can't stop him from arresting you. Best I can do is make sure you're treated fairly in custody. Fairly? Victoria's laugh was bitter. You think there's anything fair about this? No, but it's all I can offer. Sawyer looked at the telegram again, reading between the lines. Wade was bringing force. Probably hired guns dressed as deputies. This wasn't about law anymore. It was about power, and power was about to walk through that door and take what it wanted. How long do we have? He asked. Wade's telegraph said he'd arrive by noon. It's 9 now. Garrett met his eyes. If you're thinking about running, I'd understand. I'd even give you a head start. And lose everything? The ranch, our credibility? Any chance at actually fighting this? Sawyer shook his head. No. We stay. Sawyer, Victoria started. We stay, he repeated. But we don't sit here waiting like cattle for slaughter. We need leverage. What kind of leverage? Sawyer turned to Garrett. Those 2 prisoners, they said anything useful? The one you shot in the leg is scared. Keeps saying he was just following orders. The other one's staying quiet, probably hoping his employers will get him out. Garrett's expression shifted. Why? Because scared people talk. And if we can get one of them to testify about who hired them and why, we've got something Wade can't just dismiss. They won't testify against the Pitons. Too much money, too much power. Maybe. But scared enough, people surprise you. Sawyer looked at Victoria. You know anything about the leg shot one? Anything we can use? She thought for a moment. If he worked for my father's security team, he's probably military background, trained to follow orders, not to think independently. Men like that value structure, clear authority. So we give him new authority to follow. Sawyer turned back to Garrett. Can we talk to him? Garrett hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. That's all I can spare without it looking suspicious. They followed him to the cells and back. The wounded man lay on a cot, his leg bandaged but clearly painful. He looked up when they entered, fear and calculation warring in his eyes. You're here to threaten me, he said. Won't work. I know my rights. Don't care about your rights, Sawyer said. Care about facts. You were on my property, armed, trying to burn down my barn. That's arson and attempted murder. You'll hang for that if it goes to trial. I was following orders. From who? You know from who? Victoria stepped forward. Marcus Piton hired you, along with everyone else. He wants me back, wants to save face, doesn't care how many people get hurt in the process. The man's expression flickered, recognition, maybe surprise. You are her, Victoria Piton. I was. I'm not anymore. Doesn't matter what you call yourself. You're still his property. The words hung in the air like poison. Victoria's hands clenched, but her voice stayed level. I was never property. I'm a person who chose to leave a situation that was going to destroy me. Everything else, the theft charges, the accusations, that's just my father's way of controlling the narrative. He says you stole a fortune in jewelry. I took what was mine. My mother's necklace left to me in her will. He had no legal right to it. That's not what the lawyers say. Lawyers say what they're paid to say. Sawyer crouched down, meeting the man's eyes. But here's what matters to you right now. In about 3 hours, a federal marshal is coming here with enough firepower to start a war. When he does, everyone gets sorted into 2 groups, the people who cooperated and the people who didn't. You're military, right? You understand how this works. First one to talk gets the deal. Everyone else takes the fall. The man's jaw worked. I talk, I'm dead. Piton doesn't forgive betrayal. You don't talk, you hang. Your choice. Silence stretched. Sawyer could see the calculation happening, weighing fears, measuring risks, trying to find the path that led to survival. Finally, the man spoke. What do you want to know? Everything. Names, orders, how much you were paid, what you were told to do. Sawyer pulled out paper and pencil. And you'd better make it good, because if Wade gets here and your story doesn't hold up, the deal's off. The man started talking. His name was Thomas Reeves, former Army, discharged after the war with commendations and no prospects. He'd been hired by a man named Holbrook, chief of security for Piton's eastern operations, 3 months ago. The job was simple at first: track Victoria Piton, report her location, wait for further instructions. When Victoria's trail led west, Holbrook had assembled a team. Reeves and 5 others, all former military, all desperate enough for work that they didn't ask too many questions. The first attempt had been legal: the marshal, the warrant, the official channels. When that failed, Holbrook had authorized more direct action. He said to make it look like an accident if possible, Reeves explained, his voice gaining momentum now that he'd started. Barn fire, maybe the house catches too. You and the woman die in the confusion. Tragic, but these things happen on the frontier. And if we didn't die in the fire? Then we were authorized to use force. Holbrook said Piton wanted the woman back alive, but if that wasn't possible, he trailed off. If that wasn't possible, what? Reeves looked directly at Victoria. Then dead was acceptable, as long as the necklace was recovered. Victoria's face drained of color. Sawyer felt rage build in his chest, cold and focused. So your orders were to murder us for jewelry. My orders were to complete the mission, however necessary. Who else knows about this? Who gave Holbrook his orders? I don't know. We dealt with Holbrook. He dealt with whoever was above him. Reeves shifted on the cot, wincing. But there's something else. Holbrook mentioned a backup plan if the direct approach failed. What kind of backup plan? Legal? Complete. He said Piton had enough judges and politicians bought that if it came to it, they'd just manufacture whatever legal justification they needed. Fraud charges against you, Briggs, claims that you were part of the theft, that you knew who she was all along and were extorting her family. Reeves's smile was grim. They were going to bury both of you, one way or another. Sawyer looked at Garrett, who'd been listening from the doorway. You getting all this? Every word. Garrett's expression was hard. I'll get it written up proper, signed and witnessed. They spent the next hour documenting Reeves's testimony. He signed it, probably knowing it was a death sentence either way, but choosing the delayed version over the immediate one. The other prisoner, seeing his partner cooperate, cracked as well, corroborating the story and adding details about payment, communication methods, the whole infrastructure of Piton's pursuit. By the time they finished, it was almost 11. The crowd outside had grown. Sawyer could hear agitation in their voices, feel the pressure building. Victoria stood at the window, watching the street. They're preparing for Wade's arrival. Look at how they're positioning themselves, like they're expecting a show. Probably are. Sawyer joined her. Question is, what kind of show do we give them? We could still run, take the testimony, head to a different jurisdiction, try to get a fair hearing somewhere else. Where? How far would we have to go before Piton's money couldn't reach? Sawyer shook his head. No, we make our stand here. With evidence, with witnesses, with everything documented. We force this into the light. And if that's not enough, he looked at her, then we fight, really fight, whatever it takes. Victoria held his gaze. Something passed between them. An understanding, an agreement, maybe even a kind of trust that neither had expected to find. She nodded slowly. All right, we stay. Garrett approached, looking troubled. I need to tell you something, before Wade gets here. What? I got another telegram this morning. Private one, from a judge I know in the territorial capital. He said there's talk of removing me from office if I don't cooperate with the Piton investigation. They're calling it obstruction of justice. They're threatening you. Yes, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't scare me. I've got a wife, kids. I can't afford to lose this job. Garrett's voice dropped. But I also can't stand by and watch innocent people get crushed by corrupt power. So I'm going to do what I can to make sure this is handled by the book, fair and proper, even if it costs me. Sawyer felt something unexpected, respect for this small-town marshal who was choosing principle over safety. Appreciated. Don't thank me yet. Wade's got authority I don't. When he gets here, I'll have to step aside. Best I can do is make sure there are witnesses and documentation for everything that happens. It's more than most would do. At 11:30, a rider came into town from the east. He dismounted at the saloon, spoke briefly with the well-dressed men, then rode out again. Sawyer recognized the pattern, an advanced scout confirming conditions, reporting back. "Wade's close," he said. Victoria checked her rifle for the third time. Her hands were steady now, all the fear compressed into focused readiness. "What's our play?" "We stay calm. Let them make the first move. Don't give them any excuse to claim we were violent or resistant." Sawyer moved to the door, positioning himself where he could see the street. "But we don't roll over either. We make them work for every inch." "And the necklace? What about it?" "They're going to demand it. Use it as evidence of theft." Sawyer thought about that. The necklace was Victoria's only remaining leverage, worth a fortune, proof of her claims about inheritance, the thing Piton wanted most. Giving it up meant surrendering the last card they held. Keeping it meant confirming the theft charges. "Where is it now?" he asked. "Hidden, back at the ranch, in a place they won't find easily." Victoria's expression was calculating. "But if they tear the place apart, they'll eventually locate it. So we make them a different offer." "What kind of offer?" Before Sawyer could answer, the sound of hoofbeats filled the street. Multiple riders, moving in formation. Through the window, he saw them arrive. Marshal Wade leading, flanked by 6 men who wore badges but moved like hired guns. Behind them, a closed carriage that probably carried lawyers and officials. The show was starting. Wade dismounted smoothly, his gray hair catching sunlight. He surveyed the crowd with the calm authority of a man who'd done this many times before. When his eyes found the marshal's office, his expression didn't change, but Sawyer saw the calculation there. This was a man who won by being smarter than his opponents, not just stronger. "Here we go," Garrett muttered. He stepped outside, Sawyer and Victoria following. The crowd quieted. Wade approached with measured steps, his hand resting casually near his gun. Up close, his eyes were cold and intelligent. "Marshal Garrett, Mr. Briggs, Miss Peaton." He nodded to each in turn. "I believe we have business to conclude." "That's not her name," Sawyer said. "Let's not waste time on fictions." Wade pulled out papers. "I have a federal warrant for the arrest of Victoria Piton on charges of grand theft, fraud, and conspiracy. I'm authorized to take her into custody by whatever means necessary." "She filed charges first," Garrett said, "against men who attacked her property. Those charges take precedence. Those charges are under investigation. Mine are confirmed by federal authority." Wade's smile was thin. "But I'm prepared to be reasonable. Miss Peaton, if you come peacefully and return the stolen property, I can guarantee you'll be treated fairly in custody. No additional charges for the deaths that occurred at the ranch. Clean resolution for everyone." Victoria stepped forward. "And if I refuse? Then I exercise my authority. You'll be arrested by force, your husband will be charged as an accessory, and this entire town will be subjected to a federal investigation for harboring a fugitive." Wade's voice hardened. "I don't make threats, Miss Peaton. I state facts. You have one chance to end this without more bloodshed. I suggest you take it." Sawyer watched the crowd. The well-dressed men looked satisfied. The townspeople looked scared. Garrett looked trapped between duty and conscience. This was the moment, the place where most people would surrender because the cost of fighting seemed too high. Victoria looked at Sawyer. He saw the question in her eyes. "What do we do?" He gave the smallest nod. Her expression hardened. She turned back to Wade. "I want to make a counteroffer. You're not in a position to negotiate." "I think I am. You want the necklace, the so-called stolen property. I'm willing to hand it over publicly, right here, but first, I want something read into the public record." Wade's eyes narrowed. "What?" "The testimony of the men who attacked us. The ones currently in Marshal Garrett's custody. They've provided sworn statements about who hired them, what their orders were, and the fact that those orders included authorization to kill us if necessary." Victoria's voice carried across the crowd. "Read that testimony publicly, verify it's entered into official record, and I'll hand over the necklace. Everyone gets what they want." "That testimony is inadmissible, coerced from wounded prisoners." Then you won't mind it being read. If it's inadmissible, it doesn't affect your case. But it does affect the court of public opinion. She gestured to the crowd. These people deserve to know the truth about what Marcus Piton is willing to do to control his daughter. Wade's jaw tightened. Sawyer could see him calculating, weighing options. The testimony was damaging, but admitting he was afraid of it being read made him look weak. Fine, Wade said. Read it. Won't change the outcome. Garrett produced the written statements. He began reading in a clear voice that carried across the gathered crowd. As the details emerged, the orders to burn, to kill, the authorization from Holbrook, the backup plans involving manufactured charges, the mood shifted. Townspeople exchanged glances. Even some of the well-dressed men looked uncomfortable. When Garrett finished, silence hung heavy. Wade broke it. Interesting story. Doesn't prove anything except that desperate men will say anything to avoid prosecution. He turned to Victoria. The necklace. Now. It's not here. Then you violated our agreement. No, I said I'd hand it over. I didn't say I had it with me. Victoria's smile was cold. It's hidden, in a place where only I can retrieve it safely. If you want it, we go together, all of us, with witnesses. You're stalling. I'm ensuring I don't mysteriously disappear on the way to retrieve it. She met his eyes. We do this publicly, with Marshal Garrett and representatives from the town council present, or we don't do it at all. Wade stared at her. Sawyer could almost see the man's thoughts. He wanted the necklace, wanted to close this case, but taking Victoria alone gave him too much opportunity to make her disappear quietly. Doing it publicly meant witnesses, complications, less control. Finally, Wade nodded. Fine. We go together. But any tricks, any attempts to run or resist, and the deal's off. Understood. Garrett organized the group. Him, Wade, 2 of Wade's deputies, 3 town council members who'd been watching from the crowd, Sawyer and Victoria. They mounted horses, Wade providing one for Victoria, and headed east toward the ranch. The ride took 6 hours. Nobody spoke much. Tension rode with them like an invisible passenger, making every mile feel longer than it was. Sawyer stayed close to Victoria, watching for any sign that Wade or his men were planning something. As they approached the ranch, Sawyer's chest tightened. The place looked abandoned, lonely. Bullet holes still marked the walls. The barn door hung slightly open. Evidence of violence written across everything he'd built. They dismounted. Victoria led them inside the house, to her room. She pulled aside the bed, removed 2 floorboards, and reached into the space beneath. When her hand emerged, she held the velvet pouch. She opened it slowly. Even in the dim light, the emeralds and diamonds blazed with green fire. The Piton family necklace, she said quietly. My mother wore it on her wedding day. She promised it to me before she died. My father kept it locked away for years, treating it like property instead of a legacy. She looked at Wade. This is what you came for, proof of my supposed crime. Wade reached for it. Victoria pulled it back. Not yet. First, I want something stated clearly for the record in front of all these witnesses. We had an agreement, and I'm honoring it, but I want the truth acknowledged. She looked at each person in the room. This necklace was left to me in my mother's will. Marcus Piton contested that will and had it sealed. He claimed the necklace as part of his estate, despite clear documentation that it was meant for me. When I took it, I wasn't stealing. I was claiming what was rightfully mine. That's a legal argument for a court, Wade said. Then let's take it to court, a real court, not one bought by my father's money. Victoria's voice strengthened. I'll return the necklace. I'll even submit to arrest if that's what's legally required. But I want a fair trial, public, with all evidence presented, not a backroom deal where I disappear quietly. Sawyer watched Wade's expression shift. The marshal was realizing something. Victoria wasn't just a runaway heiress anymore. She'd become something more dangerous. A person willing to fight publicly, to expose the corruption, to turn this into a spectacle that couldn't be controlled. You don't get to dictate terms, Wade said. Neither do you. Not anymore. Victoria held up the necklace, light catching the stones. This thing? It's worth maybe $60,000. My freedom is worth more. My life is worth more. And I'll destroy this before I let you use it to put me back in a cage. You wouldn't, Victoria walked to the door, stepped outside. Before anyone could stop her, she hurled the necklace into the wilderness beyond the ranch. It sailed through the air, catching sunlight, then disappeared into thick scrub maybe 200 yards away. No! Wade moved fast, but it was already gone. Victoria turned back to face him. Now we're on equal footing. You want that necklace? You'll have to search for it. Could take days, weeks. And while you're searching, I'll be making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Marcus Piton is, what he's willing to do, how he treats his own daughter. Wade's face had gone red. You just destroyed evidence. I threw family jewelry into some bushes. It's still there, still recoverable, just not conveniently available. Victoria's smile was dangerous. If you want it bad enough, you'll find it. Question is, how much time and reputation are you willing to spend digging through scrub for a necklace that proves nothing except that my father is vindictive? Silence fell across the room. Sawyer wanted to laugh. Victoria had just changed the entire game. The necklace was Wade's leverage, Piton's proof, the thing everyone wanted, and she'd made it worthless by making it inaccessible. One of the town council members, a man named Harrison, cleared his throat. Marshal Wade, seems to me this situation is more complicated than a simple arrest warrant. Maybe it warrants further investigation before action is taken. The warrant is clear. The warrant assumes facts, not in evidence, Harrison continued. This young woman claims the property is rightfully hers. She's offered to submit to a fair trial. That seems reasonable. Wade looked around the room, seeing his support crumbling. The other council members were nodding. Even Garrett looked like he was reconsidering the situation. This isn't over, Wade said finally. Not by a long shot. I know, Victoria replied, but it's not ending the way you planned either. They rode back to town in darkness, the mood completely different from the ride out. Wade was furious but contained. His deputies looked unsure. The council members talked quietly among themselves. Sawyer rode beside Victoria, watching her face in the moonlight. She looked exhausted but unbowed, like someone who'd survived a battle they'd expected to lose. That was reckless, he said quietly. I know. Could have gone completely wrong. I know that too. Why'd you do it? She looked at him. Because you were right. Sometimes you have to fight even when you might lose. And I was tired of being afraid. When they reached town, Wade pulled his horse alongside Garrett's. I'm filing a report with the territorial governor. This entire situation reeks of corruption and obstruction. There will be an investigation. Looking forward to it, Garrett said evenly. Wade and his men rode off into the night, leaving the rest of them standing in the street. The crowd had mostly dispersed. Only a few stragglers remained, watching with curious eyes. Harrison approached Sawyer and Victoria. You two need legal representation, real representation. I know a lawyer in the capital, good man, doesn't scare easy. I can send word if you'd like. We'd appreciate that, Sawyer said. This isn't finished, Harrison warned. Piton's got resources. He'll come at you again. Let him. We'll be ready. Harrison nodded and walked away. Garrett touched his hat and headed back to his office. One by one, people dispersed until it was just Sawyer and Victoria standing in the empty street. We should get some sleep, Sawyer said. Tomorrow we head back to the ranch, start rebuilding what got damaged. You mean if we're not arrested in the middle of the night? Even if we are, eventually they'll have to let us go, and when they do, we'll need a home to return to. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both. They walked back to the hotel together, and for the first time since Victoria had arrived, Sawyer felt like maybe, just maybe, they were fighting together instead of just fighting alongside each other. It wasn't trust yet. It wasn't partnership yet. But it was something. And in this hard country, something was better than nothing. The hotel room felt smaller that night, like the walls had moved closer while they weren't looking. Sawyer sat by the window, watching shadows move in the street below. Victoria had fallen asleep in the chair, her rifle across her lap, exhaustion finally winning the battle she'd been fighting for days. He should sleep too, should rest while he could. But his mind kept circling back to the moment she'd thrown that necklace into the wilderness, the way it had caught the light before disappearing. It had been brilliant and reckless in equal measure, the kind of move that either saved everything or destroyed it completely. Time would tell which. Around 3 in the morning, Victoria jerked awake, gasping. Her hand went to the rifle before her eyes fully opened. Just a dream, Sawyer said quietly. She blinked, oriented herself, then slumped back in the chair. What time is it? Early. Few more hours till dawn. You haven't slept. Don't need much. That's a lie, but she said it without heat. You're watching for them to come back. Always watching. That's how you stay alive out here. Victoria rubbed her eyes. I keep seeing my father's face, the way he looked when I told him I wouldn't marry Charles. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, just looked at me like I was defective merchandise that needed to be corrected. Her voice dropped. That was scarier than anger. Some people see other people as things, tools, assets. Makes it easier to justify anything they do. Is that how you see me? As a tool for fighting back against people like him? Sawyer considered the question. Honesty seemed important right now. At first, maybe. You were a practical solution to a problem, but then you threw a fortune into the scrub and looked at a federal marshal like you'd just checkmated him. That's not a tool. That's a person with their own mind. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out if we survived this or if we just made everything worse. Victoria almost smiled. At least you're honest about not knowing. Lying won't make the situation better. They lapsed into silence. Outside, the town started waking. Sounds of horses being fed, doors opening, someone hammering something in the distance. Normal life continuing around them while they sat in the eye of a storm that kept growing. When dawn came properly, they headed downstairs. The hotel keeper, Phillips, was waiting with a message. Came for you about an hour ago. Didn't want to wake you. He handed over a folded paper, his expression nervous. Sawyer opened it. The handwriting was neat, professional. Mr. Briggs and Miss Quaid. My name is Jonathan Pierce. I'm an attorney from the territorial capital, sent by Councilman Harrison. I'll arrive this afternoon to discuss your legal situation. Please do not speak to Marshal Wade or any Piton representatives until we've met. J. Pierce. A lawyer, Victoria said, reading over his shoulder. Harrison moves fast, or he's scared Wade will arrest us before anyone can intervene. Sawyer folded the message. Either way, it's something. They spent the morning at Garrett's office, going over their statements again, making sure every detail was documented. The marshal looked like he'd aged another 10 years, the weight of competing pressures visible in every line of his face. Wade's still in town, he said quietly, staying at the boarding house with his men. He's waiting for something. Orders, probably, Victoria said. My father doesn't make decisions quickly when he's angry. He'll want to consider all the angles before deciding how to proceed. That good or bad for us? Depends on what angles he finds. She looked troubled. He's had years to build connections, buy favors, create leverage. If he decides to use all of it, we're looking at more than just legal problems. As if summoned by her words, the door opened. A man entered. Not Wade, but someone equally polished and dangerous looking. Mid-40s, expensive suit, somehow still clean despite the dusty travel, eyes that took in everything without seeming to look at anything. Marshal Garrett, Mr. Briggs, Miss Peaton. He nodded to each. My name is Edmund Holbrook. I believe my name has come up in recent testimonies. Sawyer's hand moved toward his gun. This was the man Reeves had named, the one who'd given the orders to burn and kill. Holbrook noticed the movement and smiled. I'm not here for violence. I'm here to negotiate. Got nothing to negotiate, Sawyer said. I think you do. May I sit? Garrett gestured to a chair. Holbrook sat with the ease of someone completely comfortable in hostile territory. He pulled out a leather portfolio, opened it deliberately. I'm authorized to make you an offer on behalf of Marcus Piton, a final offer, I should add, before the situation escalates beyond everyone's control. We're listening, Garrett said, though his tone suggested he'd rather be doing anything else. Holbrook pulled out papers. Mr. Piton is willing to drop all charges against Miss Peaton and yourself, Mr. Briggs. Additionally, he'll provide financial compensation, $50,000, for damages to your property and reputation. In return, Miss Peaton signs a legal document renouncing all claims to the Piton estate, agrees to never use the Piton name again, and relocates to a territory of her choosing at least 500 miles from any Piton holdings. You're offering to pay me to disappear, Victoria said flatly. I'm offering you freedom, complete freedom. You'll never hear from the Piton family again. You can build whatever life you want, wherever you want, with enough money to do it comfortably. Holbrook's expression didn't change. It's a generous offer considering the alternative. What's the alternative? Mr. Piton pursues this through every legal channel available. Federal charges, civil suits, criminal investigations into Mr. Briggs's background, his finances, his business dealings. I'm told there are irregularities that could be exposed with sufficient investigation. Sawyer felt his jaw tighten. There weren't any real irregularities, but with enough money and determination, people could manufacture them. He'd seen it happen to others. And if we refuse? Victoria asked. Then this gets worse, much worse. Mr. Piton has been patient, but his patience has limits. Holbrook leaned forward. Miss Piton, your father is not a forgiving man, but he is a practical one. He's willing to let you go completely, to write you off as a loss, if you'll simply agree to cease being his problem. He wants me erased. He wants closure, as do you, I suspect. Victoria looked at the papers. $50,000. Freedom. The chance to start over without constantly looking over her shoulder. It was more than generous. It was exactly what she'd said she wanted. So why did it feel like surrender? I need to think about it, she said. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer expires and we proceed through other channels. Holbrook stood, gathered his papers. I'll be staying in town. Send word when you've decided. He left as smoothly as he'd entered, leaving silence in his wake. Garrett spoke first. That's a good offer. Better than you'll get anywhere else. It's hush money, Sawyer said. He's trying to buy silence. Maybe, but it's also a way out. A real way out. Garrett looked at Victoria. You've been running for months. This could end it. Victoria didn't respond. She stared at the closed door like she could see through it to all the implications on the other side. Sawyer understood the calculation she was making. Take the deal and live free, but bought. Refuse it and keep fighting, but maybe lose everything. There was no clean choice. There never was in situations like this. I need air, Victoria said suddenly. She stood and walked out before either man could respond. Sawyer followed. He found her behind the office, leaning against the wall, breathing hard. You all right? I don't know. Her voice was tight. That offer is everything I said I wanted. Money, distance, freedom from my father. So why does accepting it feel like losing? Because it is losing. Just losing on better terms than you feared. But I'd be free. Would you? Or would you just be bought in a different way? Sawyer leaned against the wall beside her. Your father tried to control you through marriage. That didn't work. Now he's trying to control you through money. The method's different, but the result's the same. You doing what he wants. He wants me gone. I want to be gone. Where's the control in that? The control is in him deciding the terms, in you accepting his version of freedom instead of claiming your own. Sawyer looked at her directly. But that's just my opinion. This is your life, your choice. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would you do? I'd tell him to go to hell. But I'm stubborn, and I've got less to lose than you do. You have the ranch, your home, everything you've built. Buildings can be rebuilt. Land stays land. But pride... He paused, searching for the right words. Pride is harder to get back once you've sold it. So you think I should refuse? I think you should decide what kind of person you want to be and then act accordingly. Everything else is just noise. Before Victoria could respond, shouting erupted from the street. They moved quickly around the building to see a commotion near the boarding house. Wade and several of his men were mounted, armed, looking ready for action. Harrison, the councilman, stood in their path. You can't just leave without authorization from the territorial authority. There's an active investigation. The investigation is federal jurisdiction, Wade cut him off, which means I don't answer to local council members or small-town marshals. We're riding out to retrieve the stolen property. Anyone who interferes will be arrested for obstruction. You're going after the necklace, Victoria said quietly. And probably planning to tear apart the ranch looking for it, Sawyer added. They watched Wade's group ride out, heading east. Garrett appeared beside them, looking grim. I can't stop them. Federal authority supersedes mine. I know. Sawyer was already calculating. How long till that lawyer Pierce gets here? He said afternoon. Could be another 2 hours, could be 4. Then we've got time. Sawyer turned to Victoria. Wade's going to search the ranch. He'll use that as an excuse to destroy whatever he wants, claim he was looking for evidence. We need to be there to witness it, document what he does. Or stop him, Victoria said. Can't stop a federal marshal acting on a warrant, but we can make sure there are witnesses to how he acts on it. Garrett shook his head. This is a bad idea. You two showing up while Wade's conducting a search will just escalate things. It'll escalate anyway. Rather be there when it does. They saddled horses quickly. Harrison insisted on sending 2 council members along as witnesses, men named Porter and Singh, both solid citizens who couldn't be easily dismissed as biased. The 5 of them rode hard toward the ranch, trying to reach it before Wade's group could do too much damage. The ride felt longer than 6 hours. Sawyer's mind kept playing out scenarios, what they'd find, how Wade would react, what lines might get crossed. None of the scenarios ended well, but some were worse than others. They arrived at the ranch to find Wade's men already spreading out, searching the property. The barn door hung wide open. Tools had been pulled from the shed and scattered. Inside the house, Sawyer could hear furniture being moved, things being thrown aside. Wade stood on the porch, supervising. When he saw them approach, his expression hardened. This is federal business. Leave now, or be arrested for interference. This is my property, Sawyer said. I've got a right to witness what's being done to it. You've got no rights where a federal warrant is concerned. Actually, he does. The voice came from behind them. A man rode up, 30s, well-dressed but practical, carrying himself with quiet authority. Jonathan Pierce, attorney. I represent Mr. Briggs and Miss Quaid, and I'm here to ensure this search is conducted legally and properly. Wade's jaw tightened. I don't answer to territorial lawyers. You answer to federal law, which requires searches to be reasonable in scope and properly witnessed. These gentlemen are here to provide that witness. Pierce dismounted, pulled out papers. I've also filed an emergency motion with the territorial court questioning the validity of your warrant. Until that's resolved, any evidence you gather may be inadmissible. The warrant is federal. Your territorial court has no jurisdiction. Perhaps. But the judge who'll rule on admissibility will want to know whether proper procedure was followed. I'm here to make sure it is. Pierce's smile was professional and cold. Unless you'd prefer to explain to your superiors why you denied legal representation during a contested search. The standoff stretched. Sawyer could see Wade calculating. Pushing forward meant potential complications later, but backing down meant looking weak. Finally, Wade nodded curtly. Fine. You can observe, but you don't interfere. Wouldn't dream of it. They all moved into the house together. Wade's men had been thorough. Drawers pulled out, floorboards pried up, even the stove had been moved. Everything Sawyer owned was scattered across the floor like trash. Looking for one necklace requires this much destruction? Pierce asked mildly, making notes. Requires thoroughness, Wade said. Interesting definition of the word. They moved through each room. Victoria's space had been hit particularly hard, her clothes torn from the trunk, her few possessions broken or scattered. Sawyer saw her face go carefully blank, the way it did when she was forcing down emotion. In the barn, Wade's men had torn through hay bales, dumped grain, even checked inside water troughs. The destruction was methodical and excessive, designed to send a message as much as find anything. Any luck? Wade called to one of his men. Nothing yet, sir. If it's here, it's well hidden. Then keep looking. Or it's exactly where Miss Quaid said it was, Pierce interjected. 200 yards into the scrub, thrown during yesterday's confrontation. Hard to recover without extensive searching, which was rather the point. Wade turned on him. You suggesting we're wasting our time? I'm suggesting that a reasonable person might conclude the necklace isn't on the property, given that multiple witnesses saw Miss Quaid throw it into wilderness that would take days to search properly. Pierce made another note. But please, continue destroying a private citizen's home in pursuit of jewelry that may not even constitute stolen property, given the contested will. The will was sealed. Sealed isn't the same as disproven. I've filed a motion to unseal it. Should make for interesting reading. Sawyer watched this exchange with growing appreciation. Pierce was good, not just legally competent, but strategically sharp. He was turning Wade's search into a liability, documenting everything, building a case that this wasn't about justice but harassment. Wade seemed to realize it too. We're done here. Mount up. His men complied, leaving the ranch looking like it had been hit by a tornado. Wade paused before mounting his horse, looking at Victoria. "This isn't over." "I know," she said quietly, "but it's not going the way you planned either." Wade rode off with his men, leaving the 5 of them standing in the wreckage. Pierce surveyed the damage. "They'll use this. Claim you're hiding evidence, that the destruction proves you're desperate." "Can you counter it?" Sawyer asked. "Maybe. Depends on how much money and time Mr. Piton wants to spend making your lives difficult." Pierce looked at Victoria. "Which brings me to the offer I'm told Edmund Holbrook made you. The $50,000 settlement. You know about that?" "Holbrook sent me a copy. Professional courtesy, or so he claimed." Pierce pulled out the papers. "It's a solid offer, legally speaking. Clean break, no admission of guilt, substantial compensation. Most lawyers would tell you to take it." "And what do you tell me?" "I tell you to understand what you're accepting. Piton isn't offering this out of generosity. He's offering it because taking you to trial risks exposure. Your lawyer, me, would subpoena records, depose witnesses, make this public and ugly. He wants to avoid that." Pierce met her eyes. "So the question is, what do you want more? Peace or justice?" Victoria looked at the destroyed house, the scattered remnants of the life she'd been trying to build. "Can I have both?" "Rarely. Justice tends to be messy and public. Peace tends to require compromise and silence." Pierce's expression softened slightly. "But I'll fight for whatever you choose. That's my job." "What are my actual chances if we go to trial?" "Honestly, 40%, maybe 50. Depends on the judge, the jury, how much Piton's willing to spend on legal warfare. He's got resources. We'd be fighting uphill. And if I take the settlement? Then it ends. You get money, distance, and he gets you out of his life. Everyone walks away unhappy, but functional." Sawyer watched Victoria process this. The calculation was brutal. Fight and probably lose everything, or surrender and keep something. There was no winning move, just different flavors of losing. "I need time," Victoria said. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, Holbrook withdraws the offer." Pierce started gathering his papers. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it. But decide based on what you can live with, not what you think you should do." He left to arrange accommodation in town, taking Porter and Singh with him. Garrett lingered. "I should get back. Wade might try something else, and I need to be there to at least pretend I have authority." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think you've both shown more courage than most people could manage, regardless of how this ends." "Appreciated," Sawyer said. After Garrett left, Sawyer and Victoria stood in the destroyed house, surrounded by the wreckage of what had been starting to feel like home. "Help me clean this up," Victoria said quietly. They worked in silence, righting furniture, gathering scattered belongings, trying to restore some semblance of order. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Each item returned to its place felt like a small act of defiance against the chaos Wade had inflicted. As the sun set, they'd managed to make the house livable again. Not pretty, not undamaged, but functional. Sawyer built a fire in the stove. Victoria found ingredients that hadn't been destroyed and started cooking. "I keep thinking about my brother," she said suddenly. "Henry. When he decided to testify against Father's business partner, I begged him not to. Told him it was too dangerous, that he'd lose." She stirred the pot mechanically. "He said some things were worth losing for, that living with yourself mattered more than winning. He was right. He was also dead 3 weeks later." "Yeah." Sawyer didn't have a good answer for that. Sometimes being right doesn't keep you alive. "So what do I do? Take the money and live, or fight and possibly end up like Henry?" "I can't answer that for you." "I'm not asking you to answer it. I'm asking you to help me think it through." She turned to face him. "You've become, I don't know what to call it, a partner, someone whose opinion matters. So tell me honestly, what do you think I should do?" Sawyer considered his words carefully. "I think you should ask yourself who you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years. Do you want to be the woman who took the money and built a quiet life, or the woman who fought even though she might lose?" He paused. "Either choice is valid. Neither makes you a coward or a hero. They're just different paths with different costs." "That's not helpful." "I know, but it's honest." Victoria smiled despite herself. "You're terrible at advice." never claimed otherwise. They ate dinner quietly. The food was simple but good. Afterwards, they sat on the porch watching stars emerge. The valley spread out before them, dark and vast and indifferent to human drama. I hated this place when I first arrived, Victoria said. It felt like the end of the world, harsh and empty and lonely. What about now? Now it feels like the only place I've ever been honest, where I could be myself without performing or pretending. She pulled her knees up. That's worth something, isn't it? Worth a lot, actually. More than $50,000? Can't put a price on that kind of freedom. Victoria was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. I'm going to refuse the offer. Sawyer felt something in his chest, not quite surprise, more like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. You sure? No, but I'm tired of making decisions based on fear. My father built his whole empire on making people afraid to challenge him, afraid to expose him, afraid to stand up. If I take his money, I'm just giving him another kind of victory. Could lose everything. I've already lost everything, multiple times, always managed to rebuild. She looked at him. And this time I'm not alone. No, Sawyer agreed. You're not. They sat together as darkness deepened, two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives by accident and somehow become allies. Maybe something more than allies, though neither was ready to name it yet. Tomorrow, they'd tell Holbrook no. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Tomorrow, everything would get harder and more dangerous. But tonight, for just a few hours, they allowed themselves to simply exist. To sit in comfortable silence and watch stars wheel overhead and feel something that might have been hope or might have been delusion, but felt worth holding on to regardless. Thank you, Victoria said quietly. For what? For not telling me what to do. For trusting me to figure it out myself. Your life. Your choice. But you're part of it now. This affects you too. I know, and I chose to be part of it. Sawyer stood, stretched. We should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. They went inside, each to their own room. Sawyer lay in his narrow bed, listening to the house settle, wondering if they'd just made a brave decision or a catastrophically stupid one. Time would tell. It always did. Morning came with the kind of clarity that made decisions feel either inevitable or catastrophic, depending on perspective. Sawyer woke to find Victoria already up, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of her. She'd been writing something, her handwriting precise despite the rough conditions. What's that? He asked. A letter. To my father. She didn't look up. Figured if I'm refusing his offer, I should at least explain why. Not that he'll care, but I need to say it anyway. Sawyer poured coffee, sat across from her. What are you telling him? That I'm done being afraid of him, that he can spend whatever he wants trying to control me, but it won't work because I'm not the same person who ran away 3 months ago. She set down the pen. And that if he keeps pushing, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Marcus Piton really is. That's a threat. It's a promise. Victoria folded the letter carefully. He understands promises backed by consequences. It's the only language he respects. They rode into town together, the morning sun turning the landscape into shades of gold and shadow. Neither spoke much. The weight of what they were about to do sat heavy between them, refusing $50,000 and guaranteed safety in favor of an uncertain fight that might cost them everything. Most people would call it foolish. Sawyer figured most people had never had to choose between survival and self-respect. They found Holbrook at the boarding house, eating breakfast like a man without a care. He looked up when they entered, reading the answer on their faces before either spoke. You're refusing. Not a question. We are, Victoria said. Holbrook set down his fork carefully. Miss Piton, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've seen dozens of people in your position running from powerful families, thinking they can win through stubbornness alone. You know how many actually succeeded? How many? None. 0. They all eventually surrendered or got crushed. He pulled out papers. This offer is your last chance at a clean exit. After this, Mr. Piton will use every resource at his disposal. Legal, financial, personal. He will make your life unbearable until you either submit or break. He's been trying to do that my whole life, Victoria said quietly. Hasn't worked yet. Because you've been running. Now you're standing still, making yourself a target. Holbrook's expression was almost sympathetic. I admire the courage, truly. But courage doesn't pay legal fees or protect you from manufactured charges or prevent accidents from happening to people who inconvenience powerful men. Is that a threat? It's a professional assessment of reality. Sawyer spoke up. We understand the risks. We're refusing anyway. Holbrook studied them both, then nodded slowly. Very well. I'll inform Mr. Piton of your decision. He gathered his papers. For what it's worth, I hope you survive what comes next. But I wouldn't bet on it. He left without another word. Victoria exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath. No going back now, she said. Nope. You sure about this? Last chance to walk away. Claim you were coerced or manipulated. Sawyer looked at her. You coercing me? No. Then I'm sure. They met with Pierce at his temporary office, a room above the general store that he'd rented for the duration. The lawyer listened to their decision without judgment, making notes occasionally. All right, now we prepare for war. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've been doing research. Your father's business practices, Miss Piton, are interesting. Lots of sealed records, sudden disappearances of inconvenient witnesses, lawsuits that get dropped mysteriously. Nothing provable, but a pattern. He's careful, Victoria said. He's sloppy, or his people are. Pierce tapped one document. I found 3 separate instances where partners who crossed him ended up bankrupt within months. Each time, the bankruptcy was preceded by sudden audits, frozen assets, and criminal investigations that went nowhere after the target was ruined. How does that help us? Because it establishes pattern of behavior, harassment, abuse of power. If we can prove your father has a history of destroying people who challenge him, it undermines his claims that you're just a thief who needs to be brought to justice. Sawyer leaned forward. What do you need from us? Everything you know, every detail about your father's operations, his associates, his methods. We're going to build a case that this isn't about stolen jewelry. It's about a powerful man trying to silence someone who knows too much. Victoria hesitated. If I tell you everything, I'm betraying my entire family. My stepmother, my cousins, people who never did anything to me directly. They stood by while your brother was killed, Sawyer said quietly. While you were sold off like property. Silence is its own kind of betrayal. She looked at him, something painful crossing her face. Then she nodded. All right, where do I start? They spent the next 4 hours going through Victoria's knowledge of the Piton Empire. She knew more than Sawyer expected, years of listening to dinner conversations, reading documents left carelessly on her father's desk, piecing together implications from overheard arguments. She described shell companies, bribed officials, threats disguised as business negotiations. Pierce documented everything, his pen scratching steadily across page after page. This is explosive, he said finally. If even half of this is provable, we're not just defending you. We're potentially bringing down one of the most corrupt business operations in the territory. That's a lot of enemies, Victoria said. Yes. Which is why we need to move fast and stay ahead. Pierce looked at them both. I'm filing motions tomorrow. Unsealing your mother's will, demanding full disclosure of the necklace's provenance, requesting investigation into the circumstances of your brother's death. We're going to make noise. Lots of it. Enough that your father can't make this disappear quietly. He'll retaliate, Victoria said. Count on it, which is why you two need to be careful. Very careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't accept food or drink from anyone you don't trust completely. Watch for surveillance. The paranoia felt both excessive and entirely justified. They left Pierce's office as the sun started its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. You hungry? Sawyer asked. Starving, but I don't think I can eat. Try anyway. Going to need your strength. They found a small restaurant, more of a boarding house that served meals, and ordered stew. The food was adequate, the atmosphere tense. Sawyer noticed Victoria kept watching the door, tracking every person who entered. You expecting someone? Always. That's how you stay alive when powerful people want you dead. Cheerful thought. Realistic thought. She pushed stew around her bowl. I keep wondering what my mother would think of all this. She was so careful, so proper. Never challenged my father directly. Just found quiet ways to resist, teaching me to read banned books, telling me stories about women who chose their own paths. Sounds like she'd be proud. Or horrified? Hard to know. Victoria set down her spoon. She died asking me to promise I'd be happy. I said yes because I was 8 and didn't understand that happiness wasn't something you could promise. It was something you had to fight for. You fighting for it now? I'm fighting for something. Not sure if it's happiness or just the right to make my own choices. She met his eyes. Is there a difference? Probably not. They finished eating and headed back toward the hotel. The street was quieter now, evening settling over the town like a blanket. Sawyer felt the hairs on his neck rise seconds before he saw the shadow move between buildings. Run, he said quietly. What? Run. Now. They bolted. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets punching into the wooden sidewalk where they'd been standing. Sawyer grabbed Victoria's arm, pulling her around a corner as more shots rang out. People screamed. Someone shouted for the marshal. They ran through the gap between two buildings, emerged in an alley, kept moving. Behind them, footsteps pounded. At least 2 men, maybe more. This way, Victoria gasped, pointing to a narrow passage. They squeezed through, came out near the livery stable. Sawyer's mind raced. They needed weapons, needed cover, needed to get somewhere defensible. The stable. He grabbed Victoria's hand and they sprinted for it, diving inside just as another shot cracked through the air. The bullet splintered wood above their heads. Get down, Sawyer hissed. They crouched behind hay bales. Sawyer pulled his gun, checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. Not enough if this turned into a prolonged fight. Footsteps approached the stable entrance. Slow, deliberate, confident. Mr. Briggs? Miss Peaton, a voice called out, cultured, calm. This doesn't have to continue. Step out with your hands visible, and this ends peacefully. Like hell, Sawyer muttered. Victoria pressed against him, breathing hard. That's Carlyle, one of my father's personal security. If he's here, they're done pretending this is legal. How many others? Carlyle never works alone. At least 2 more, probably 3. The odds kept getting worse. Sawyer looked around the stable, trying to find an advantage. Horses shifted nervously in their stalls. A ladder led up to a loft. The back wall had gaps between boards, not enough to escape through, but enough to see. I'm going up, he whispered. Higher ground. You stay here, stay quiet. Sawyer, trust me. He moved quickly up the ladder before she could argue. The loft gave him a view of the stable entrance and the street beyond. He could see 3 figures now, Carlyle and 2 others, all armed, moving with professional caution. Sawyer aimed carefully at the ground in front of Carlyle and fired. The shot kicked up dirt, making all 3 men dive for cover. He used the confusion to reposition, moving to a different part of the loft. That was your warning shot, he called down. Next one won't miss. Brave words from a man trapped in a barn, Carlyle responded. We can wait all night, or we can burn you out. Your choice. The threat was real. Sawyer could see one of the men carrying something that might be lamp oil. They'd torch the place with him and Victoria inside if necessary. Then he heard new voices, Garrett shouting, Pierce, other townspeople. The ambush had drawn attention, and now witnesses were gathering. Carlyle must have heard it too because he called out, Stand down, Briggs. This is a federal matter. Interference will result in charges. Federal matter my ass, Garrett's voice rang out. I heard gunfire, saw you and your men shooting at civilians in my town. Drop your weapons or I drop you. You don't have authority. In my town I do, and I've got 12 armed citizens who agree with me. Garrett sounded closer now. Last chance. Weapons down. Now. A tense silence, then slowly the sound of guns hitting dirt. Guns. Sawyer climbed down from the loft. Victoria emerged from behind the hay bales. Together they walked to the stable entrance. Outside, Garrett had Carlyle and his men surrounded by townspeople armed with rifles, shotguns, even a few pistols. It was the most beautiful sight Sawyer had seen in weeks. Carlyle's expression was cold fury. This is a mistake. All of you will regret. Save it, Garrett interrupted. You're under arrest for attempted murder. And before you start talking about federal authority, these witnesses saw you shooting at unarmed people. That's a crime, regardless of who signs your paychecks. Pierce stepped forward, looking disheveled but triumphant. I've also just received word from the territorial capital. The judge reviewing your warrant, Marshal Wade, has suspended it pending investigation into irregularities in how it was obtained. Seems someone filed an affidavit claiming bribes were paid to expedite the federal authorization. That's a lie, Carlyle said. Perhaps. But until the investigation concludes, you have no legal authority here. Pierce smiled coldly. Which means you're just 3 armed men who tried to murder 2 citizens. How the law handles that is pretty straightforward. Sawyer watched this unfold with a mix of relief and disbelief. They'd been seconds from death, and now their attackers were being arrested. The reversal felt surreal. Garrett's men took Carlyle and the others into custody. The crowd slowly dispersed, though people kept looking back at Sawyer and Victoria like they were seeing ghosts. "You two all right?" Garrett asked. "Better than we should be," Sawyer said. "This is going to bring more trouble. You understand that?" "We do." Garrett nodded grimly. "Then I suggest you stay somewhere public tonight. Lots of witnesses. Makes it harder for anyone to try again." They ended up in the hotel dining room, surrounded by townspeople who'd decided to keep watch. Harrison organized shifts, groups of armed citizens who'd stay alert through the night, making sure nobody else tried anything. "Never thought I'd see this town stand up to outside pressure," Victoria said quietly. "Most places just fold when powerful men start throwing weight around." "Most places don't have a marshal like Garrett," Sawyer replied, "or people who remember what happens when you let bullies win." Around midnight, Pierce joined them with news. "I've been in contact with colleagues in the Capitol. The investigation into Wade's warrant is moving faster than expected. Seems several other families have filed complaints about Piton's methods over the years. Your case is just the catalyst that made people finally pay attention." "What does that mean for us?" Victoria asked. "Means the tide might be turning. If the warrant gets invalidated, if the investigation finds evidence of corruption, suddenly you're not fugitives, you're victims. That changes everything. And if it doesn't find evidence, then we keep fighting, but we're not there yet." Pierce pulled out more papers. "I've also done more research on your mother's will. The judge who sealed it retired 3 months after doing so and bought a house worth 3 times his salary. That's suspicious enough to warrant unsealing." Victoria leaned forward. "If the will proves the necklace was mine, then the theft charges collapse. And without those charges, the entire legal framework of your father's pursuit falls apart." Pierce's expression was cautiously optimistic. "We're not out of the woods, but we're finding paths through." They talked through strategy until exhaustion forced them to stop. Victoria fell asleep in her chair, head resting on her arms. Sawyer stayed awake, watching over her, occasionally scanning the room and the street beyond for threats. Sometime before dawn, Garrett appeared with coffee and grim news. "Carlyle's asking for a deal, says he'll testify against Piton in exchange for reduced charges." Sawyer felt something spark in his chest. "He'll really turn on Piton?" "Says he's tired of taking risks for a man who'd abandon him the moment things got complicated." Apparently Piton sent a telegram disavowing any knowledge of Carlyle's actions. Left him hanging. "Honor among thieves dies fast when the money stops flowing," Sawyer observed. "Always does." Garrett sipped his coffee. "Pierce is meeting with him this morning. If Carlyle's testimony is as damaging as he claims, this could be the break we need." As sunrise painted the sky, Victoria woke. She looked disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was and why. "What did I miss?" Sawyer filled her in. Her expression shifted from tired to alert to something approaching hope. "Carlyle will really testify?" "According to Garrett. He knows everything. Where the bodies are buried. Literally, in some cases." Victoria stood, paced. "If he talks, my father's entire operation could unravel." "That what you want? To destroy him completely?" She stopped pacing. "I want justice for Henry. For every person he crushed. For my mother, who died knowing her daughter would be sold off like property." Her voice was hard. "If that means destroying him, yes. That's what I want." The meeting with Carlyle happened at noon in Garrett's office. The man looked smaller somehow, defeated. When Victoria entered, he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Miss Piton, He stopped, started again. "I followed orders, that's all, just following orders." "That's what cowards always say," Victoria replied coldly. "Right before they betray the people they served to save themselves. Maybe. But I'm the coward who can put your father in prison." Carlyle looked up finally. I've kept records, names, dates, payments, every questionable thing I was ordered to do over 8 years, all documented. Pierce leaned forward. Why keep records if you were just following orders? Insurance. In case Piton ever decided I knew too much. A bitter smile. Turns out I was right to be paranoid. Over the next several hours, Carlyle laid out everything. The bribes, the threats, the carefully orchestrated destructions of business rivals. He named judges, politicians, law enforcement officials who'd been bought. He described how Henry's death had been arranged. A spooked horse, a broken saddle strap, an accident that wasn't. Victoria's face went white when he explained the details of her brother's murder, but she didn't interrupt. Just listened with terrible focus as Carlyle confirmed what she'd always suspected. When he finished, silence filled the room. Pierce spoke first. This is enough to bring federal charges. Conspiracy, murder, bribery, racketeering. We're talking decades in prison if convicted. If convicted, Carlyle emphasized, Piton's lawyers are good. They'll fight every charge. Let them fight. We've got evidence now. Pierce gathered the documents. This changes everything. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Pierce filed formal charges with the federal prosecutor. The investigation into Wade's warrant concluded that it had been obtained through fraudulent claims and illegal pressure. The warrant was invalidated. Wade himself faced charges of corruption. The judge who'd sealed Victoria's mother's will was subpoenaed. Under pressure, he admitted he'd been paid to seal it despite finding no legal basis for doing so. The will was unsealed, revealing exactly what Victoria had claimed. The necklace had been explicitly left to her, not to the Piton estate. With the theft charges gone and Carlyle's testimony damning Marcus Piton, the narrative flipped completely. Victoria wasn't a fugitive anymore. She was a victim who'd escaped her father's control, and everything he'd done to recapture her was evidence of his corruption. The newspapers picked up the story. Reporters descended on the small town, eager for details about the dramatic confrontation between a powerful magnate and his rebellious daughter. Victoria gave one interview, measured, careful, devastating in its calm recitation of facts. 3 weeks after Carlyle's testimony, federal marshals arrested Marcus Piton at his estate. The charges included conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of public officials, and a dozen other counts. His lawyers immediately filed for bail, which was denied given the flight risk. Sawyer read the news with Victoria on the porch of the rebuilt ranch house. The damage from Wade's search had been repaired, the place looking better than before, the way things sometimes do after surviving destruction. It's really over, Victoria said quietly. He's actually going to face trial. Looks that way. I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a dream, that I'm back in that house, trapped, waiting to be married off. Not a dream. You fought for this, earned it. She was quiet for a moment. We fought for this. I couldn't have done it alone. Probably not, but you would have tried anyway. Victoria smiled. Stubborn runs deep. Noticed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley. The same valley that had seemed so harsh and empty when Victoria first arrived now felt like something else. Maybe not home yet, but the foundation for one. What happens now? Victoria asked. After the trial, after everything settles, what do we do? Sawyer considered the question. Keep living, keep working, keep building something worth defending. That's simple? Never said it was simple, just said that's what we do. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had that first night when they'd stood together against impossible odds. I think I'd like to stay. Here. With you. If that's still acceptable. Acceptable? Sawyer almost smiled. That your way of saying you want to make this arrangement permanent? I suppose it is. Unless you've changed your mind about needing a partner. Haven't changed my mind. Then I'm staying. As Victoria Briggs, if you'll have me. Not as Iris Quaid or Victoria Piton. Just me. Whoever that turns out to be. Sawyer stood, extended his hand. Victoria took it, and they shook like business partners sealing a deal. Which, in a way, they were. A partnership built on mutual respect and shared survival, rather than romance or convenience. Sometimes that was better. Welcome home, Sawyer said. Thank you. Victoria looked around the valley, the ranch, the life they'd fought so hard to protect. For everything. The trial took 6 months. Marcus Piton's lawyers fought hard, but Carlyle's testimony and documentation proved impossible to overcome. The jury convicted on most counts. Piton was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Charles Harwick, the man Victoria had been promised to, quietly married someone else. Victoria received a brief note from him expressing relief that their arrangement had fallen through. Apparently, he'd been as trapped by the engagement as she had, unable to refuse his family's pressure. The note was awkward and inadequate, but Victoria appreciated the honesty. Her stepmother reached out once, a letter full of recriminations and blame. Victoria burned it without finishing. Some relationships weren't worth salvaging. The Piton estate was liquidated to pay fines and restitution to the people Marcus had destroyed over the years. Victoria received nothing from it and wanted nothing. She'd left that life behind completely. The necklace, the infamous cause of so much trouble, was never recovered. Sawyer and Victoria occasionally talked about organizing a proper search for it, but never quite got around to it. Seemed fitting somehow that it stayed lost in the wilderness, a fortune abandoned in favor of something more valuable. A year after the trial concluded, Sawyer and Victoria stood on the same porch where they'd first faced Wade's men. The ranch had grown, more livestock, expanded buildings, fences that actually stayed fixed. They'd hired 2 ranch hands, young men eager to learn the work. Victoria had changed too. Her hands were calloused now, her face weathered by sun and wind. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The refined elegance she'd arrived with had been replaced by something harder and more real. "You ever regret it?" Sawyer asked. "Giving up the money? The easy way out?" "Every time my back hurts from hauling water," Victoria replied. "And never, when I remember what I traded it for." "Fair answer. You ever regret getting involved in my mess?" Sawyer thought about it honestly. The danger, the violence, the months of uncertainty. Then he thought about what had been built from it. A partnership that felt more solid than anything he'd constructed before. "No," he said finally. "Turns out some messes are worth the trouble." Victoria leaned against him slightly, a gesture that had become comfortable over months of working side by side. "We should probably have an actual wedding at some point. Make this legal and proper." "Probably should." "But not yet." "Not yet. Got work to finish first." "Always got work to finish on a ranch." "Exactly." They stood together as evening fell, 2 people who'd chosen each other not because of romance or desperation, but because they'd survived something terrible and come out stronger. It wasn't the story Victoria had imagined when she first fled her father's house. It wasn't the life Sawyer had pictured when he'd placed that advertisement for a mail-order bride. But it was real, built on honesty and hard work and the understanding that freedom wasn't something given. It was something you fought for every single day. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain the valley desperately needed. Victoria tilted her face up toward the coming storm, smiling. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said. "Thought they meant destruction. What do you think now?" "Now I think they mean change. And change isn't always bad." The first drops began to fall, light and tentative, then heavier. Neither of them moved to go inside. They stood in the rain, letting it wash over them, feeling the desert earth drink it in gratefully. And in that moment, the frontier didn't feel empty or harsh anymore. It felt like possibility, like a blank page where 2 people could write their own story, free from the expectations and constraints that had tried to define them. Victoria had escaped a cage built of wealth and power. Sawyer had risked everything for a principle that mattered more than safety. Together, they'd proven that sometimes the stubborn ones, the fighters, the people who refused to surrender, sometimes they won. Not because they were stronger or smarter or luckier than everyone else, but because they were willing to pay the cost of freedom, whatever that cost turned out to be. The rain fell harder now, turning the dust to mud, filling the dry creek bed, giving life back to land that had waited patiently for it. Sawyer and Victoria stood together, soaked through, laughing at nothing in particular, feeling something that might have been joy or might have been relief, but definitely felt earned. "Come on," Sawyer said finally. "Let's get inside before we drown." "In a minute. I want to remember this." "Remember what?" "This moment. This feeling. The proof that we actually did it. We survived. We won." Sawyer looked at her. This woman who'd shown up on his doorstep as a stranger wearing lies and transformed into someone he trusted with his life. Someone who'd learned to haul water and mend fences and shoot straight. Someone who'd thrown away a fortune because her freedom was worth more. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We did." They walked inside together, dripping water on the floor. Victoria would complain about cleaning later. Sawyer built a fire in the stove while Victoria changed into dry clothes. They made dinner together, their movements synchronized from months of practice. They ate slowly, talking about tomorrow's work, the cattle that needed moving, the roof section that still leaked. Ordinary concerns, normal life. The kind of mundane existence that people with nothing to run from took for granted. For them, it was extraordinary. Because they'd earned it by refusing to be owned, refusing to surrender, refusing to let power and money dictate who they had to be. They'd chosen each other and chosen freedom and chosen to stand their ground when everyone said running was smarter. And somehow, against all reasonable odds, they'd won. Not perfectly. Not without scars, not without cost. But they'd won. And as the storm broke fully over the valley, washing the land clean and filling the air with the smell of rain on dust, Sawyer and Victoria sat together in their imperfect house on their hard-won land, building a life that was messy and difficult and completely, honestly, theirs. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.